Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. Her name is Dr. Chloe Carmichael. Last name is spelled Carmichael. She just published a book. And if you're watching this on YouTube, X, Rockfin, or Rumble, you'll see the full cover. And it is Can I Say That? Why Free Speech Matters and How to Use It Fearlessly is the full title. And I read through it today. It's a great book, very well cited and very timely. I think it's a very important topic. So I'm delighted to have her. This is not her first book. She's written a couple others and a couple academic articles as well. Her other books in my notes are Nervous Energy, Harness the Power of Your Anxiety. That's also timely, 2021. And then in 2018, she wrote Dr. Chloe's 10 Commandments of Dating, How to Stop Getting Hurt, Put Yourself Out There, and Find a Relationship That Lasts. And then she wrote articles for a couple books, academic books, as far as I could tell. Game On, Leaders Who Last, and Revisioning Family Therapy. And she's a licensed clinical psychologist. She's a USA Today bestselling author, and she's a sought after speaker. She earned her doctorate in clinical psychology from Long Island University after graduating summa cum laude from Columbia University with Phi Beta Kappa honors. And I just mentioned some of her other books. She's also been featured in the New York Times, Vanity Fair, Forbes, and Rolling Stone, and has appeared on programs such as ABC's Nightline, VH1, and Inside Edition. She also serves on the advisory board for Women's Health magazine and is a consultant for Baker McKenzie, one of the world's largest law firms. And her website is Dr. Chloe. So I'll bring that up, and people can check that in the show notes too. So I'll put a link to her website and things like that where she has other information. But today we're going to talk about this book she just published, 2025. Can I Say That? So Dr. Chloe Carmichael, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Will. Great to be with you and all of your audience.
Awesome. So for people that may not have heard your name or aren't familiar with you, maybe you could talk about your background. I covered a little bit of it, but background and research and what led up to the publication of this book. Can I Say That?
Sure. Yeah. So I was up until, last year, I guess I was what you would call a more normal psychologist. Just, talking about anxiety and things people typically think of as being psychologist stuff. And then I published this book because during COVID, I know we were all being asked to do a lot of things that didn't make sense, and we couldn't talk about them, or we'd be deplatformed. And as a mother, I was really uncomfortable when I was told I'd have to mask my then 3-year-old son, for indefinitely. And so thankfully, my husband and I were able to leave New York and move to the free state of Florida. That was why we did it, because of our son. And I thought, okay, well, that's fine for me, but what about all those other parents out there that are just being told to do this and to just, not question it? So I wrote an article about the harms of masking children. And after I shared that article, which I was scared to do because I knew it was going to maybe burn media bridges with, the big enjoyable media that I had been enjoying, but I felt I had to do it. Like, staying silent about potentially little kids being harmed, it was like a red line. So once I did that, I noticed that it was leading to conversations that were stimulating, cognitively stimulating. It was emotionally regulating for me to start saying what I really thought. And I realized I'd been doing what psychologists call self-censorship about a lot of things, the trans stuff, like all kinds of stuff. I had just been staying silent. And through finding my own voice, I realized, speaking up and telling the truth is good for you. It was helping me cognitively and emotionally, and my social relationships were more authentic. And I thought, maybe I need to learn more about this and share and talk more about this. So that's what led to my new book.
The new book, Can I Say That? It's such an issue. Like, we are all self-censorship. There's a fact right at the beginning of your book, which was shocking to me how many people did this. But according to your book, 84% of people self-censor. That's basically, 4 out of 5 people are doing that in public life. And it doesn't seem right, but I think we're used to it. Like, why is that? What are the consequences?
Yeah, and that's a statistic from the New York Times, right? So if they're quoting it that way, you can only imagine what it's really like. But why are we doing it? Well, that's a good question. So I think that there's a couple of reasons. One is many of us, including me until somewhat recently, really didn't understand that there was a harm in stifling ourselves, and we knew that there was a risk in sticking our neck out and speaking up. So many of us might have just said, well, I'll just, keep it to myself or people I trust or whatever. And we didn't see the harm in that. And then another reason, and I think this is a big one, is that we now know that the Biden administration was, pressuring X, Meta, and YouTube to censor what was on the air. And what that did is that manipulated our sense of social consensus. So, human beings were tribal animals. We are trained to read the room. And, if I had some personal belief that little green men were talking to me, I'd probably keep it to myself because I might realize that's kind of weird and that could get me, ostracized from the group. And by manipulating our social consensus, by controlling what was on YouTube, Meta, X, and much of the mainstream media without telling us that they were doing it, they made us think that we were the only people that saw COVID the way many of us actually saw it, or that saw trans issues or immigration or all kinds of issues. So what they did is they distorted our sense of reality, and that affects the way our sense of reality affects the way that we choose to communicate.
Right. So it's like there's cascading downstream things from the inhibition of speech, right? So it's like it really does affect you I mean, one of the themes of your book is like the psychological effects too, like the personal psychological effects of not being able to even have dialogue, right?
Yeah. So when we don't share with people what we really think, what we're doing is suppressing. First of all, that's the first step in really kind of a 3 or 4 part sequence. But the first step is suppression, where you tell yourself, oh, better not say that, zip it. And then when you do that often enough, it becomes automatic, which is then repression. It's like suppression that's automatic. And when we do that often enough, when we repress long enough, we push things to the back of our mental closet and pretend that we don't really believe the way we do. What happens then is that we can eventually go into denial, where we actually kind of forget ourselves, like what we even really think. And I know that it's hard to believe that, right? Just as we're sitting here, but yet it happens all the time. Like, haven't we all ever had the experience of somebody says, "What's the matter?" And somebody says, "Nothing." And they mean it. Like and it takes a lot of effort sometimes for them to really kind of unpack it and say, "Well, I guess I was upset about this and that and the other thing." And then they kind of bring it out, but they have pushed it to the back of their head, to the point where they're in denial. And if we do that big enough and often enough, we can really lose touch with ourselves even.
Yeah, it is a remarkable dynamic, like this phenomenon of self-censorship, and it's taking place in the public forums too. So it's workplace, universities, educational system, like you mentioned, social media and things like that. So people are self-censoring, but they're also feel like there's consequences to the thing. It's not just emotional, but like reputational and career harms as well, right?
Yeah, definitely. Reputational and career harms, which again is why I think to a certain degree, people have felt like the safe thing to do is just to stay silent, which again, I admit I did the same thing. Um, I I got, as you mentioned, summa cum laude at Columbia and got admitted to a very elite PhD program. I did not accomplish that by saying what I really thought, right? I built really big relationships in the media. I did not accomplish that, by saying what I really thought. It's unfortunate, but our universities, I share this some statistics in the book. In the New England area, for example, which is where the majority of Ivies are located, can you guess, Will, the liberal to conservative faculty ratio?
I'm sure it's really lopsided. I don't know what the exact.
28 to 1, 28
Wow,
to 1.
wow,
Yeah.
wow.
And so then when we look at, legacy media and things like that, um, all of this creates a real pressure on people to stifle themselves. And then moreover, the media and universities, these are like they're positioned as these experts. And so I unpack in the book as well a word many people in your audience, I'm sure, know, which is groupthink, but it's actually a very specific psychology term. And there's 8 major ingredients that can set the table for groupthink to occur. And one of those ingredients is the presence of what's called self-appointed mind guards, right? And so that's what, when you have universities saying, yeah, sure. It's perfectly fine to chop off the breasts of teenagers, or no, puberty blockers are completely reversible, right? Like these quote mind guards, meaning when they say something, it's just, unquestionably true. So universities and media, they function that way, and they can create this environment of groupthink. And another one of the ingredients for groupthink is what's called the illusion of unanimity, which is again what we were talking about with social media, when the Biden administration was essentially removing anything but a certain unanimous opinion. So there was this incredible, perfect, terrible storm that was set, and I think it really messed with our social awareness.
I think you're right. It reminds me of the Ash experiment. That's the one where the guy walks into a room and everybody says the line is one size, with I think kind of like a scientist in a white coat, so an authority figure, and almost everybody says, "Yeah, whatever you say." They're all the same, and so that groupthink enhances itself. So they,
Yeah.
yeah,
So the Ash experiment I discuss in the book, and what they call that is normative social pressure. So in the Ash experiment, participants afterwards, they would always just say like, "Oh yeah, you know what? I knew that line wasn't really longer. I was just saying that." Like they were conscious of it. And what the Ash experiment then led to, the next one, was Festinger's experiment that established cognitive dissonance, which is one of these things that is so misunderstood by people. But what it is it's when we adjust our thoughts to accommodate our behavior. So basically what Festinger did is he got 2 sets of participants to lie, and one set he got them to lie um, by convincing them that it would be the nice thing to do. And another set of participants, he got them to lie by paying them a significant sum of money. The ones that received the significant sum of money, they were able to remain conscious of what the real truth was. They knew exactly why they were lying. Those that he got to lie because it would be the nice thing to do, they actually changed their thoughts and beliefs to accommodate their behavior of lying. So the Ash experiment led to the cognitive dissonance experiment. And all of these things add up to the idea that if we lie to people enough, to be politically correct, or because we think it will give us some kind of advancement here or there, eventually it tinkers with your own actual sense of your beliefs. You start to take it on yourself.
I'd never heard of that. Fenster, you said Fenster. What was the sign?
Festinger.
Festinger. I've never heard of that. So was that in the same time as Milgram and Ash as Festinger? Festinger's experience?
Festinger came later. So
Later,
this
okay.
this is all in the book. But yeah, the Ash experiment, I kind of stack it up that the Ash experiment led to the cognitive dissonance. So the Ash experiment is where maybe you're telling a lie, but you know you're telling a lie and it's not really messing with your reality.
Right,
But
right.
when you start telling lies often enough and for reasons that get a little fuzzy in your head, it starts messing with your actual sense of reality. And then we have groupthink, which is like a bigger mass, scale sense of that.
Wow, that's amazing. I'll have to look into that. I've never heard of that before. It kind of ties in with something you said earlier in the book, which is some people will go into this um, curtailment of free speech just to continue the process. I think you mentioned something like they will continue, they will self-perpetuate to not be accused of being like, a wrong thinker. So they actually join in. It's almost like something like the Stanford prison experiment, or it's one of these experiments where you just adopt these behaviors so that you're not the actual scapegoat. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. It can be a defensive behavior, right? I mean, when you see what's happening to other people who stick their neck out, and then, you say, well, gee, I don't want that to happen to me. And people can get really skittish about that. And then the more people that do silence, which by the way, that's another one of the ingredients of groupthink is direct pressure upon dissenters. And I unpack all of those in the book as well, which is, it's like, hello, cancel culture. But yeah, so when we're afraid of sticking our neck out there, then we can just stay silent, which is part of the reason I wrote this book, because I want people to realize that there is actually also a cost to stifling yourself. It's not just a, you know, easy way out like it might seem at first.
Right, it's the interior, like, effects on your personality and what you really think, like you said, like, how many of these people have allowed their personalities and outlooks to be morphed by censorship or whatever just to get by or adapt? It's really pretty sinister. It's almost like some kinda Orwellian effect or something like that. But, it goes back to how important it is, why free speech really matters, right? Like, all these things, the processes that are being stifled are essential to us to really self-actualize. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, speech is one of our most profound capacities as human beings. It's when we have unique regions of our brain that are specifically devoted to the comprehension of language and to the production of language. The psycholinguist Steven Pinker has said that humans need to talk the way that spiders need to spin webs. Like it's just literally in our DNA. And so when we start interfering with that, it would be, to me, almost like if removed a couple of somebody's fingers or something. Like that's why we say it's a God-given right. And interestingly, the root of the word psychology goes back to the Greek word for psyche, which means spirit. And so it really is freedom of speech has a psychological value and it is a God-given right.
Right, so they have that, and it's a God-given right, and it has psychological and emotional, like, you have a full chapter on the emotional gifts of language, so it's like it's very like, you talk about the epidemic of loneliness, this kind of self-censorship is a factor in that. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So emotion, is we emotionally regulate through speech, and this is neurologically measurable. So the amygdala, for example, is the part of the brain that gets active during times of fear. And when we name our emotions, the amygdala starts to settle down. When we express ourselves authentically and have a good heart to heart with somebody, our cortisol levels drop. Human beings are social animals. And one of the ways that, we form bonds or get help from our support network or engage in problem solving or feel safe is through language, through communication. We experience what's called neural coupling, Will. So you and I, as we have a conversation, if we're really talking to each other honestly and truly listening to each other, studies have been done on this too. Like if somebody's pretending to listen, it doesn't work. But if we're truly listening to each other when we talk, we actually experience what's called neural coupling, where our brain kind of starts exhibiting the same patterns.
Interesting. It's really important. So all these things, these bonding elements, the social support, are all parts of having open dialogue. I mean, it goes all the way back to classical Greece or something like that. Like these are things like I almost never hear the word dialogue anymore. It's people shouting, or they exhibit kind of like a, it's something like, I don't know, like something out of like a struggle session or something, because there are the hit you write about the hidden dangers, and we may not be fully cognizant in the front of our brain about the dangers of self-censorship, but there really are serious dangers, and they're exhibited in our kind of day-to-day life these days in 2025. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a very anxiety provoking way. And I know this because I lived it, right? It's a very anxiety provoking way to live your life, to know that you have values and thoughts and beliefs that could be a real problem if other people found out, that you had these beliefs. I mean, when I moved to New York City in 2001, I was a young person and I thought, oh, wow, this is going to be great. Such a, salon of, marketplace of ideas. Wow, New York City. What a cold and rude awakening, that I experienced when I discovered, no, actually here, you pretty much have to parrot whatever the current Democrat talking points are, or else you'll be excluded, from the Arts and Culture Society or from the Media Society or from the Academic Society. And these were all areas that I wanted to be included in. And as a very young person, just in my early 20s, I just started zipping it. I just started laughing at jokes I didn't think were funny because I didn't want to be outed. And I just went along that way for quite a long time until that last straw situation came up of masking children. And then once I started really seeing what I really thought, um, the effects on my own psyche were pretty profound.
And it also, the ability to use words and talk actually is a pressure valve. It's a release, right? And that's why I think you see some of these people maybe in a more left-leaning environment or Democrat, they go straight to like physical violence or words of violence. Would, and I think that that's reflected in your book, right?
Yes. So it's a really interesting concept that there's two groups of statistics that I think actually map together very interestingly. So one of them is, and I call this the 5Ds in the book, which is that people who identify as liberal are statistically more likely by their own self-report to defriend, and this is over political differences, to defriend on Facebook, to distance or drop contact in real life, to disinvite a speaker, or to decline to date across the aisle. And they are also, the same group of people are 2 to 8 times more likely to endorse political violence. And I don't think anyone else yet is really putting these two things together, but I think it's a really, frankly, obvious connection. Because as a psychologist, if I'm working with a violent offender or an anger management client, the first thing I want to do is get them to learn how to use their words, get them to learn how to stay in an argument and solve it with words. Violence increases when dialogue ceases. So I think that, I try to assume, to give people the benefit of the doubt, that they're, coming from a good place. They think they're being virtuous by, refusing to dialogue with anybody that doesn't see things the way that they do. But what they're actually ironically doing is setting the table for this internal pressure cooker. You use the word pressure valve, William. That's a perfect one. And then people act out with violence when they feel unable or unwilling to use words.
Yeah, and you see that. I think you see this stuff. Like you mentioned these case studies that like I remember seeing on social media. One was people chasing down Andy No and Riley Gaines at San Francisco State University, just screaming and really threatening behavior. And it just didn't seem fitting for the, you know, the positions people were having. I think it's fully reasonable to have women in women's sports and men in men's sports. So like it's really strange how this kind of censorship in this stuff then also it creates what you also see a lot, I think, in our current culture and society is the real passive aggressive like traits in people. I've seen it in the workforce, but you mentioned you have great vignettes in the book. I think they're very instructive. But I remember reading through one of like this woman who's not saying what she really wants, but then she's acting out in kind of a sniping manner. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of those. Do you mean the one that I call Kayla?
Yeah, I think that
Oh,
was it. I think it was in
yeah.
chapter 3, maybe like the third chapter. Does that sound right? I don't know.
Yeah, so it's an interesting case, and tell me if I've got the wrong one here that you're thinking of. But I tell a story to illustrate a lot of the concepts that we talked about today about a woman named Kayla. I just call her that. These aren't like actual people, they're combinations of clients to protect anonymity. But I tell a story about a young woman named Kayla that comes from kind of a traditional values family, and like so many young people in that situation, she goes off to college, takes a gender studies course, and suppresses herself at first when the teacher says things like, well, men are pigs, and if, women, are superior, and all these different things. And at first she's actively holding herself back. And, but then she has to start writing papers that make it sound like she agrees. And so she just goes along with it, starts getting on the women's committee and gets little promotions. As we all know, there's these awful, women's affinity groups that give women a leg up in hiring and all these things. And so through her behaviors of accepting these positions, she starts to, cognitive dissonance, feel like, well, I must be okay with this, right? So then she has a boyfriend that identifies as a feminist, but of course, she's secretly, unconsciously, she's, dissociated, got into denial about wanting a different type of a guy. So she, as you said, well, that she becomes just very passive aggressive towards her boyfriend, kind of sniping at him. And when he tries to, take charge, be a little stronger, she, swats him down. Don't mansplain me. Don't be a toxically masculine man. But she's secretly craving it. And so then, she basically tempts this um, janitor, who's an ex-con in the school library, into hitting on her because she's craving this. And then she gets mad at him because she can't own the fact, that she's looking for this, that she wants this. So yeah, when we can't be in touch with ourselves, with what we really want, we start acting things out, we start becoming passive aggressive, and we don't get what we really want at the end of the day either.
Right. And so it's not just verbal, external verbal dialogue, it's the internal dialogue. So the dialogue with your true self, too. It seems to be like it may not be speaking, but you're speaking to yourself. If even you're like engaged in self deception or something like that, or you're inhibited. And that's kind of the whole thing that's wrong in our culture, too. Like, I think that this book is very important in addressing cultural issues because it's created this fragility epidemic and triggering and these kind of like thin skinned approaches. You talk about safe spaces. These are all responses to not being able to, words aren't violent, right? Like you say that right in the beginning. These are all responses to this whole lack of ability to have free speech, right?
Yeah, words are not violence, right? I mean, that's one of these things that it's a nice catchphrase. It, sounds kind of poetic, like, but people are taking it literally. So it's like as if saying, well, his words were like a punch in the gut, or, his words were like a slap in the face. It's fine to use language metaphorically, but the danger comes in, and it, in my opinion, becomes psychotic, which means in psychology terms, it means broken from reality, when people start taking metaphors and using them, in a concrete way, as if they're actually attached to reality, because humans have a very helpful, adaptive need for reciprocity. So, if you help me, I help you, and we form a social bond. Or, if we have a justice code going back to, Hammurabi and earlier, eye for an eye, if somebody's violent towards you, you at least have the right to be violent enough for self-defense, and in some cases, maybe even more. And so when people start hijacking phrases like words are violence, or, you're threatening my existence,
Right.
right now, then we're starting to set up self-defense language if we take that literally. And sure enough, then we wind up with, Tyler Robinson allegedly shooting Charlie Kirk. Interestingly, the first trans question that was asked to him is when Tyler Robinson allegedly fired. And, you're threatening my existence
Right.
is one of those phrases that people love to use in the trans movement. And they frankly can be, I think, very violent.
There's no question about it. And they also use the word hate. Like, so this word hate, like, so if you say, a biological male shouldn't be in women's sports, it's interpreted as hate, but there may be some countervailing value that seems reasonable. So it's this hypersensitivity, this kind of erosion, like you call it, an erosion of like self-efficacy too. Like I can't handle what you're saying, therefore I have to lash out. Like this is a real phenomenon. This is a real thing.
Yeah. Well, what it also is there, Will, that you're getting at is a weaponization of victimhood. And in psychology, I mean, it's not exactly, it's a form of getting at explaining that weaponization of victimhood. There's something in psychology called the secondary gains of victimhood. And this is not controversial at all. This is like in any literal psychology 101 textbook, you will learn about the secondary gains of victimhood. And, the typical example is, it happens automatically, sometimes even unconsciously. The textbook example is a little girl breaks her leg. She has a cast. She gets excused from gym class. Everybody signs the cast. It's actually almost kind of fun. And so when the doctor says, cast is time to come off, she insists, no, 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 I still need it. It's not healed yet. And she's not even lying. She's just unconsciously gotten so attached, to the victim role and its benefits that she doesn't want to give it up. And that's the most benign case of, the secondary gains of victimhood. People can also be very conscious of those gains. And like you said, then they can then say, well, I don't like what you're saying. I don't want to engage with you on the merits. But if I say that you are being hateful, then I am a victim. And therefore, you now have to stop talking. I can weaponize my victimhood. Ironically, the biggest bullies, I think, are usually the people that are calling someone else a bully as a strategy to silence them. To me, like that's the real bullying.
Good point. So it's like the victim is the bully. Like that's the whole thing. Like I'm a victim. Truth Seekers asking, I'm a few minutes behind, but I'd love to hear her take on the difference between free speech and threatening speech, or maybe hate speech could be synonymous with that. Do you have a take
Yeah,
on that?
absolutely. And I'm so glad that this question came up because one of the things that I explain in the book is that uncertainty always increases anxiety. And so it's really helpful to have a very clear, no nonsense understanding of what exactly we mean by, free speech and how does that map onto, does that mean that we can use our speech to say, let's meet at 5 p.m. and beat the hell out of so and so? No, of course that's not covered by free speech. Now, I might express beliefs or ideas that somebody thinks are hateful or that somebody thinks are threatening, but that's part of life. Somebody else out there can say that they think women are stupid. I can live with that. It's a different thing, of course, than if somebody says, well, again, let's meet at 5 p.m. and baseball bat groups of women. That's threatening in the physical sense of an incitement and a plan of action for violence. So speech that is specifically, and I don't mean, again, metaphorically in this words are violence, you're threatening my existence type of thing. I mean, when somebody says, I'm going to put my hands around your neck and squeeze till you die, that's threatening speech. Telling me that, you think women are stupid, that might make me feel psychologically threatened, but that's not threatening in the legal sense of the word.
Right. So there is definitely a difference. And I think you go into that in one of the chapters, if I remember. But this book isn't just addressing a lot of the problems surrounding censorship and free speech. You have significant parts of the book that provide solutions, right? So you're providing insights and means and work sheets to help people work through things, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So, part one of the book is all about why we should care about free speech, the cognitive, emotional, and social benefits of speaking up, as well as the costs of self censorship. And then, part two, now that I've hopefully gotten people interested and excited to do it, part two is how, not only how to speak up, there's over a dozen techniques of how to speak up in a variety of challenging situations, whether it be at the workplace or at a university or at, kind of a high pressure soccer moms club. And then there's also a lot of techniques for how to listen respectfully. Because frankly, let's not pretend, right? We all struggle. I do. If somebody's standing in front of me saying a bunch of nonsense and it starts to get personal or heated, I can start chomping at the bit, wanting to get my part in as well. I think we all can. Um, so to have good, true dialogue, if we want people to listen to us, we also have to be willing to listen to them too. So the book has techniques for both.
Right. So people can check it out. It's not just you're addressing the problem with, but you also have solutions to it. And that, I think one there's a comment here. Is that why Ray's asking? Is that the psychology in why so many people are masking up? I don't know. Maybe that's because of like they're just compliant to the thing. Maybe masking actually has kind of a free speech aspect because you have a mask on. Maybe it's imposing like censorship, self censorship. I don't know. Do you have any comments on the Ray's comment?
Yeah, I mean, that's I would attach that to groupthink. I think in the comments that Ray's comment might have come in close to some people talking about groupthink. And I would definitely put the whole, masking thing in as a part of groupthink personally.
I agree. And that's what Daddy says too. Groupthink is ubiquitous in corporate America. I think you have to engage in groupthink to survive in corporate America. I think that's an essential trait, honestly. And then Discerning says, important timing for this book. Very true. This is a very timely, very important book. People check that out. People check it out. We are at the 37-minute mark. Is there anything you'd like to add or anything I missed, Chloe, before we wrap it up?
No, I would just respond to that last remark that you made about groupthink being essential to survive in corporate America. My hope is that maybe that's diminishing a little bit. It's one thing to be a team player. It's another thing to, check your rational brain at the door and go into groupthink. And I do think you're right. It's been essential, unfortunately, but I'm happy to say that I've been invited to speak about this topic at places like Columbia University, as well as big law firms, places that I thought would tear up my number when I put this book out, but they've invited me to speak. And so I'm hopeful that maybe the tide is turning a little bit.
That's great. And that's another thing. So not you're not just an author as well. You are a public speaker. So people can go check out your website, which is at Dr. Chloe, DrChloe.com. And check out your materials, what shows you've been on, your speaking, your press. You're also a coach. I don't know if you're still in a private therapy. Are you still functioning as a therapist?
Not so much because 'cause I'm putting all my energy into this, but yes, I mean, even no matter how small your group is out there, if you're out there and, like, you have a kid that wants to, like, have a book club for their university or whatever, this is truly a passion project for me. I'm not making money on this book really. So if you're interested in this and you have a small group that wants, me to pop in virtually just to say hi and talk to people about it, just contact me through my website. And if you do get the book and you like it, please give it a good review on Amazon because like my big publisher dropped me, my fancy agent dropped me when I wanted to do this. So I really want to, I really need and want to show support for this book.
Yeah, do it, guys. And there's different versions of it. I was looking on Amazon earlier, I think there's a paperback, Kindle, Is that right? Let me see if I can bring that up.
Yeah, and in fact, now they're doing Audible too. So
Audible
there's a
too. So
lot of
the
ways.
Audible. So there's a lot of ways to look and see this, and you can find out more on her website again, which I will put links in the show notes. And it's Dr. Chloe. And great job and congrats on the book. Let me bring up
Thank
the
you.
title again. And let's see if I got any more comments. There's thanks, William. Click Truth Seeker. Everybody says thanks. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Really appreciate it. And again, the full title of the book, you can get it on Amazon or go to her website, is Can I Say That? Why Free Speech Matters and How to Use It Fearlessly. And the guest again is Dr. Chloe Carmichael. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Will. Much appreciated. Take
Cool.
care, everybody.
You too. Stay there. Stay there.